US President Donald Trump's fixation on Greenland has now gotten even stronger as he has threatened European nations backing the island nation's territorial sovereignty with a blitz of tariffs. In a Truth Social post, Trump says he would impose the 10% tariff on goods coming in from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, United Kingdom, Netherlands, and Finland, till a deal is reached for the purchase of Greenland. A diplomatic jolt to leaders in Europe and beyond. Trump's message is clear: no deal is ever final. Trump's 10% tariff will eventually rise to 25% in June on 8 European nations, came after the nations collectively vowed to shield Greenland against American aggression. Troops from different NATO countries have already amassed in the Arctic. All eyes now remain on the European Union. How will it defend itself from Trump's attack? In a joint statement, EU leaders said, and I quote, "Tariffs would undermine transatlantic relations and risk a dangerous downward spiral." Ambassadors from the European Union's 27 countries will be convening an emergency meeting, possibly to discuss counteracting measures to the all-out economic war launched by the White House.
This is not how allies should treat each other, and in that sense, I understand the word blackmail. Yes, absolutely. We have until February 1st to really present a united front, to make it clear that we do not find this acceptable. And we have also stated that, as far as we are concerned, the territorial integrity and self-determination of Greenland and Denmark are not up for discussion.
French President Emmanuel Macron, who has been vocally opposing Trump's Greenland takeover, has now warned that no amount of intimidation will persuade European nations to change their course. Macron's message was echoed by the Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, who warned the EU would not be blackmailed by Trump, and the Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, who said threats have no place among allies. Macron has now called on to the EU to use its most powerful measure, something that the bloc has never used before, known as the anti-coercion instrument. It is the Commission's trade bazooka that allows for curbing imports of goods and services. The instrument allows EU to react and target unprecedented economic coercion. French Agriculture Minister Annie Genevard has said that Trump also has a lot to lose from threatened tariffs. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says it was a mistake for Donald Trump to threaten tariffs against opponents of his plan.
I wanted to tell you that the perspective of an increase in tariffs for countries that have chosen to contribute to Greenland's security, in my view, is a mistake, and I do not agree with it. I share the US presidency's focus on Greenland and the Arctic, which is a strategic area where excessive interference by actors that may be hostile must be avoided.
Responding to Trump's threats, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski says that tariffs can only be imposed on the European Union as a whole.
I hope someone will explain to him that we are a customs union and you can only put tariffs on the EU as a whole.
Slamming Trump's tariffs, Ireland's Foreign Affairs Minister described the tariffs as completely unacceptable and described the unequivocal support from the EU as something that is democratic and acceptable by international law. Greenland praised the reaction of European countries. Minister Naya Nathan-Nielsen said she was amazed to witness the first responses from the targeted countries. Danish Foreign Minister will now be visiting fellow NATO members Norway, the United Kingdom and Sweden to discuss the alliance's Arctic security strategy. Thousands of people marched against Trump's wish to acquire the mineral-rich island in Nuuk, the seat of Greenland's autonomous government. Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen also joined protesters who waved Greenlandic flags. Thousands more protested in Copenhagen and other Danish cities. Many of them carried Greenland's flag, while others held signs with slogans like "Make America Smart Again." Mr. James Jackson is a journalist and also a political analyst. Is now joining us live from Berlin. Mr. Jackson, thank you very much for your time. And for this moment. It's good to see you. Let's discuss this. Why do you think President Trump is now becoming more aggressive on taking over Greenland?
Really, that's a question that no one can answer except for Donald Trump himself. You know, in the USSR, we called it Kremlin watching, when you would try and guess why the leaders who didn't communicate were doing what they did. Some theories are that he's trying to distract from the release of the Epstein papers, as well as that he even had a stroke in December. Which is why his behavior is so erratic. It really does seem strange because there is no real strategic reason why getting Greenland is so important now at this point. Perhaps it's to distract from domestic politics. But then again, it's actually a deeply unpopular position in America. Only about a quarter of people support it, which, considering, you know, a quarter of people are huge Donald Trump fans, fanatics even, it's hard to imagine that the floor of that position could be any lower than 25% in polls. So really, we are dealing with what we could call the madman theory of politics, which was Richard Nixon's theory that, you know, he wanted to be so erratic and unpredictable for the Soviet Union, his enemies at that point, that they really didn't know what to do and they wouldn't know how to react. And perhaps that's it. Perhaps there is some theory behind this. Of course, he's being advised by particular people. Stephen Miller, we know, is a radical in Trump's office and has been claimed to be the one who introduced Trump to the Greenland idea. But you know, the Greenlandic people, Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark, and Denmark is part of NATO. And
let's talk about that, Mr. Jackson. Let's talk about that, Mr. Jackson, because there is seemingly a split between the United States and Europe, because European countries have come together in defense of Greenland and Denmark. We are seeing leaders, you know, marshalling together and saying that what Trump is doing is a mistake. That's what Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is saying. And now there is involvement of NATO. What can NATO do to bridge the gap and to, like, stop the stalemate?
Yeah, it's true. I don't think NATO can do much because, you know, by its design, the Europeans were very reliant on the United States. The NATO came about after the Second World War, at a time when basically the US and Western Europe wanted to ally themselves to keep out the USSR. For a long time, that was its raison d'etre, and people questioned after the collapse of the USSR, is there a need for NATO? Of course, that all changed in 2022 when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And countries like Finland and Sweden ended up joining Denmark, countries that were non-aligned for a long time. But of course, just 3 years on from that, or, you know, 2 since Scandinavian and Nordic countries joined, it seems like NATO might be about to collapse. Of course, Denmark, which was always one of the closest US allies within NATO, they lost a disproportionate amount of soldiers in Afghanistan, which was, of course, the only time in history that NATO's joint defense strategy treaty, Article 5, was actually called after 9/11. So, you know, Denmark has followed the US line on everything and is now being humiliated across the globe. So this is going to lead European countries to think we need to be out on our own and we need to invest more in defense without the United States. If Trump does launch tariffs, I know he's announced them, then this is going to be a further division across the Atlantic, a further break in the transatlantic relationship, and we might see something like European Gaullism. Of course, the French idea of sovereignty and autonomy. But I will note at this point, Germany, the largest country in the EU, has been very, very quiet and has actually just pulled back a number of its troops, all of its troops from Greenland. There were only, of course, about 14 there, but they've left. It's unclear whether that was on schedule or they've left just because of the tariffs that Trump has announced.
Okay. Mr. James Jackson, it's good to see you. We'll have to end it there. Thank you for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me.